Hey everyone, and welcome. As Patricia said with the introduction, we've seen 3 months of protests now in Peru since early December. We've had roadblocks throughout the south, throughout the Andean south, stymieing transport of goods, stymieing mining, and the shutdown of the iconic Incan ruins in Machu Picchu. A major complex reporting challenge for anyone covering it for TV, text, or photos. With our three panelists who have spent many weeks on the ground there, I'd like to first bring them in to discuss, what it was like in, on the front line, on the ground, the very visceral experience of how they navigated some of these challenges, especially with the blockades, with roads shut down and transport very limited. Samantha, I might bring you in first. You mentioned one of your interesting stories about Machu Picchu when they closed it down in late December, early January. It was closed for almost a month, and yet you managed to get there. Tell us a little bit about the challenges you faced and a bit about that reporting effort.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. As you mentioned, the logistical challenge, in my opinion, the logistical challenges were a huge part of this story. And though they made our jobs more difficult, I think it was really important to be able to capture how it was affecting normal people, but also how it was affecting tourism to Peru. And when I was in Lima for this, very large march in February, or I guess that was, I'm losing track of time now, January. We noticed that, we were there when they announced that Machu Picchu was closing, that the ruins themselves were closing, and that the town closest to the ruins was actually going on strike. And it was really, important to me to capture that part of the story, because it seemed to me that these, these business owners, these locals, that these union leaders were basically sacrificing their own livelihoods that depended entirely on tourism to Machu Picchu in order to send a message to the government. And so we really wanted to be able to get there to tell that story. But as you mentioned, it was quite difficult in large part because, as any of you know who've been to Machu Picchu, the main way to get there, not the only way, but the main way that people get there is by train. And the trains had been damaged, the train tracks had been damaged in the protests. And so the only way for us to get there was to take this long route where we basically drove 5 hours in the dark. It had to be late at night because it was a specific window that we found when the roads were not going to be blocked. And even then there were, boulders on the streets. We kind of had to go around these twists and turns around these big boulders. We had this driver named Pitbull. So he was quite the character, and he got us there safely to this town called Santa Teresa, which was pretty much the closest town we could drive to. And we spent the night there at a hotel, and the next morning had to basically hike for about 3 hours along the train tracks. And that was the route that locals were having to take too, in order to get supplies and food, a route that they usually would be able to take very quickly on a train for, a very little amount of money if you're a local that lives there. Now they had to take this hike. And so we'd see people with wheelbarrows, and it was just so striking to see this completely, empty ghost town that is usually the tourist attraction to Peru suddenly, completely on strike. And we actually, to get back, we found a quicker way that was actually taking a wooden rail cart that had a motorbike on the back, which was also the way that the mayor of this town closest to Machu Picchu was getting to and from the closest town. So it just really captured to me how Peru was really at a standstill in many ways, and so was the tourism. And it was really this town was really taking a hard hit.
Just take us through the experience of when you arrived at the Incan ruins. I mean, as you say, normally you have hundreds, thousands of tourists from all over the world flocking there every day. So obviously, probably everyone on this call has seen photos or been there. I mean, are we talking? Was it completely empty, or were people filling out at the point when you arrived? What was that like?
Well, it was closed to the public, and the only way we were able to get in was through the Ministry of Culture. They basically allowed us in briefly in order to take some pictures. And I mean, to me, it was my first time in Machu Picchu, so it was incredible. But it was also really, striking because there was nobody there. It was only the maintenance workers kind of mowing the grass, just the staff, but there were no tourists there. And there were a few tourists who were, who had still tried to make the trip there, who had hiked there and were waiting outside the entrance, but they weren't allowed in. And I felt quite bad for them, but we went in briefly because we wanted to, for the sake of the story, capture this place completely empty, mainly for the visuals of that, because I think it really sent this message home that, Peru was on strike. Even the place that is, I think, to many Americans and foreigners, kind of the most recognizable image of Peru. And to me, it was a way to kind of get people to pay attention. And that was really the goal of the strike for them as well, is to use this landmark to send a message to the government, even if it meant sacrificing their own livelihoods.
Mm-hmm.